my name's John. I work at 10up. I'm the director of engineering, so I'm responsible for about 50 engineers that build websites for everything from WordPress.com VIP to some self-hosted sites. Everyone knows we're hiring, so I'll skip that.
Are you hiring?
Yeah, we're hiring still, believe it or not. And in a previous life, I worked at Automatic for a few years. Worked on Jetpack, worked on some .org stuff, worked on VIP. And WordPress.com sort of has a funny installation of WordPress. As much as I know Automatic and everyone that works at Automatic, and myself included, likes to preach that WordPress.com is very similar to WordPress core, very sort of does not deviate too far away from what everyone else is using in terms of the version of WordPress. And that's true. However, one of the things that WordPress.com does take advantage of in a very unique way is the concept of having multiple networks. And in my opinion, I tend to be a little grumpy sometimes about WordPress and some decisions and some things that happen. And multi-network is one of the things that I tend to be a little grumpy about because it gets absolutely no love. It gets no attention. And by multi-network, I don't mean multi-site, right? Like everyone is sort of on board with what multi-site is, right? Yes, I see lots of nods. Okay, so if you're not, check it out. Check the Google. You'll figure it out. Basically, it's just running multiple sites with one installation of WordPress. Generally, what happens, the natural progression, is like you find WordPress. And you're like, oh, WordPress is great. You're like, oh, well, I have like a few sites I want to run on WordPress. How do I do that? So maybe you have like 5 installations of WordPress. You're like, well, this sucks. This WordPress update comes out. You have to update 5 installations. You have to update a bunch of plugins. Like no one wants to live in that world. So then you find multi-site, and you're like, oh, well, this is great. Like, we are running multiple sites off of one installation of WordPress, and that's all that multi-site is. Inevitably, I think what happens, though, is rarely do you have the case where you want what multi-site actually gives you, which is you want, well, multi-site's going to give you subdomains, right? You'll have john.domain.com, bob.domain.com, joe.domain.com, or you have subdirectories, domain.com/john/bob/joe. And that's usually not real helpful, right? Because what you want is another domain, right? You have another client, you have another site, another idea, another domain that you own that you want to have be that other site. And traditionally, the way that we solve this problem in the WordPress sort of community, the typical way to do this is with something called domain mapping. Now, domain mapping is not the right way to do this. I realize I have not the popular opinion when I say this. Domain mapping is not generally the right way to do this. There are a few reasons why I think that that is the case. One, the way that we do domain mapping isn't actually what domain mapping is. Like, this is a problem in general with WordPress where we name things incorrectly. It's an admin bar when it's really a toolbar. It's a term when it's really a category or a tag. It is a network when it's really sites, and it is a site when it's really a blog. Like, all of the terms that we use in WordPress are all screwed up all over the place. So when we say domain mapping is mapping one domain to another. It's mapping it to a place. But instead in WordPress, we map it to an IP address, or we map it to something else. Like, we're not actually doing what domain mapping actually is. We call it that. It is the wrong thing. So you end up with multi-site and then domain mapping, which is sort of not the right approach. And the reason why it's not the right approach is because WordPress has built into it, sort of it understands already how to give sites separate and new domains. You can kind of make it be whatever you want them to be. And while WordPress doesn't necessarily expose a lot of the UI to make this convenient for you, it is possible to do it. And over the years, starting with WordPress 3.0, when multi-site was brought into WordPress core, and it got a little bit of attention because it was pretty crusty, And there is sort of there's a lesson to be learned, I think, with the original multi-site code, which is like, don't build things alone by yourself, right? Like Donica mostly built multi-site over the course of years by himself. If you remember WordPress MU, right? Like that was mostly Donica building multi-site by the necessity, like for WordPress.com, by the need of something as big as WordPress.com. So we end up with a lot of funny architectural decisions and funny naming conventions because it's one guy, right? Like when you're one person writing code in the corner, you end up with mostly crap, right? Like I've written a bunch of code in the corner and it's mostly crappy, right? Like I think that's just what you end up with. And over the years of merging multi-site into WordPress core, multi-site has gotten a lot better. Multi-network has stayed sort of invisible, but the fun thing about multiple networks in WordPress is it's built into WordPress core. Like it is an invisible thing that exists in WordPress that has no user interface that you can use to have multiple networks of sites running off of the same installation. So I have a plugin that exposes a UI for this, that if this is a thing that you want, is just called WP Multi-Network. And all that it really does is sort of very similar to the WordPress way, gives you a network UI to be able to create new networks of sites. Now, sort of like that is sort of like a funny thought, but I think really that multi-network is like the new multi-site. Like it is the 5 years from now multi-site. Like you will get to a point where you think like, gosh, I've got all of these sites now running on one installation. I've got all these domains that are set up in there, but I want some sub-sites off of this domain. I want this one to be multiple networks, but this one to not be multiple networks. And this one needs to be multiple sites, but this one is just one site by itself. But you don't want to update 50 copies of Akismet, right? Like you just don't want to go through and update that plugin 1,000 times. And like, yes, like things like automatic updates will solve that problem in a way where plugins will update on their own on the fly, and WordPress core can get to a better place where it can sandbox updates and make sure that sites don't go down. And a lot of that stuff, a lot of those problems can be solved in a different way. But I think something like having multiple networks solves it in the real world for us. Solves it for people that are deploying multiple sites or just deploying networks of sites that want to be able to manage all of these individual blogs or sites under one installation. So check that plugin out. It's pretty cool. There are a couple different ways and plugins and different approaches to solving sort of the multiple network UI problem. So mine is not the only one. There's one by Ron Reddick. The WPMU dev guys have one called Networks. We all sort of are taking a very similar approach, I think, although I haven't checked anybody else's out in a while. But check it out and see if it's useful. But I think sort of the practical part of it is a little bit more fun because I think it helps to see sort of how WordPress works in this way. If you're not familiar with it, we can sort of talk a little bit about the code side of it, so you can try and grok how this works. So in multi-site, when you turn multi-site on in WordPress, it installs a couple of extra funny tables that you rarely ever interact with on your own. You get WP blogs, you get WP blog versions, and you end up with this funny sites table that doesn't do anything. You end up with WP site. And it only ever has one entry in it, right? You've got the one for the one domain that is running on this whole installation. Now, if you have multiple sites in your multi-site installation, they actually go in the WP blogs table. You have multiple sites in your blogs table, just like you end up with multiple networks in your site table. But that's whatever, right? So if you go in and you create a new site, see if this works the way it's supposed to. Add a new site. Okay, well, add a new site. I don't know what I've got in here. All right, so we make a new site. We've got that in there. And if we refresh, Yay, okay, so there's my subdirectory, there's my site, right? And so what you end up in your blogs table is just a list of sites. But you still, at this point, only have one network of sites. It's the same multi-site installation that you've always had. So my jjj.dev is just a multi-site install. You've got sites, you've got users and plugins and everything that you're used to. But since I have WP multi-network installed, I have this extra UI up here for all networks. And this is the one network on my multi-site installation. I have one group of sites at jjj.dev. They're all in there, jjj.dev/John/Bob/Joe, however many sites live on that network. And this is a very stereotypical multi-site installation like you would have on WordPress.com, like you would have at a school, like you would have anywhere else, which is one multi-site network. But you can create as many networks as you want to. We can go ahead and create a new network conveniently with whatever we want to call it. Hello. We can do whatever we want. We can give it whatever path we want, right? We can call it whatever we want again, create our network, and what we'll end up with is we'll end up in our blogs table. We have a new blog, but with a different site ID. So I deleted my other one while I was messing around with it. But so I have site ID 3, and I have 3 blogs that are on one network, and I've got one blog on a second network. So you can create a whole other network of sites on a whole other domain, and it will operate as a whole separate network of sites later. Question right off the bat.
What does that mean to have a separate network? What can you do differently on one network from another?
It's a good question. So the best example, and I'll rephrase, I'll recite the question, is what can you do with multiple networks? Why would you need it? What is the benefit of having multiple networks? I think the best example of multiple networks is WordPress.org. So we've got WordPress.org as a site. We've got BuddyPress.org as a site. We've got BBPress.org as a site. But each 3 of those sites have their own group of sites. We've got codex.bbpress.org, codex.buddypress.org, make.wordpress.org. Make.wordpress.org is actually a 4th network that has its own sites, make.wordpress.org/UI/accessibility/core. So we end up with all of these networks of sites that have different plugins running on them, that have different themes running on them, but have the same user base in the middle. So you have the same login and password across multiple domains, across multiple groups of sites, across multiple sort of fake kind of installations, but they're using the exact same code. So what you get from that is one code base to maintain, but you get to partition your sites off into basically groups of sites. So if you want to network activate one plugin to run on 4 sites, you make a new network of those sites with a new domain or whatever you need, and then you network activate one plugin across those 4 sites. So it's really good for something like WordPress.org, where you've got multiple domains and multiple sort of sites and multiple sub-sites and lots of sites that are branching out. But it also is really good for something like a school. So like schools that have different departments, you have the communications department, you have science, you've got computers, you've got all these different departments. Now maybe they need multiple sites. Your comm school needs multiple sites. Your arts and science needs multiple sites. Your faculty needs multiple sites. But they all have different administrators. They all have different plugins that they might want to activate or deactivate. They all have different little bits and bobs, but you have the same users in the middle.
Other than a shared login, what's the benefit of having them all? What is the benefit of not permitting them to be separate installations?
So the benefit is not having several code bases to try and connect back into the middle, right? So for people that say keep everything in version control, you don't have to go in and update all of your code across this installation and this installation and this installation and this one. Or if there's a bug in some plugin, you don't have to update it in a bunch of separate places. You're maintaining one code base in the middle that is there for other, like in something, and I think like WordPress.org, the reason why it's a good example is because we have multiple engineers that are working and maintaining different parts of WordPress.org. So we have people that are working on WordPress.org, people that are working on API.WordPress.org, people working on Make, people working on plugins and themes, and then people working on BuddyPress.org and BBPress.org, where there is separate code running there, but there's not a lot of value in having a ton of separate repositories all over the place. The second, I think, the problem that this solves to a certain degree is deployment. Is you have one code base that you are able to deploy across whatever it is that is in your production environment without needing to think about having some of this code deploy over here, some of this code deploy over here. This separate repository has to go over here instead. Instead, it's just one code base, or as many sort of as you need, but you get to push them all from the same place.
Is there a cost in speed?
No, I mean, because it's still multi-site, right? It's however many sites you're going to have is still however many sites you have. So doesn't cost you anything to have multiple networks running.
Because it's partitioning off. So.
Yep.
Any smaller networks, aren't they going to run faster than one larger network?
No, it's not really a speed problem, right? Like it's when it comes down to speed, you're thinking think hardware, right? Like I don't know, like many Volkswagens are not as fast as one Ferrari, right? Like however many networks you have, it will still it won't matter. Like you'll be.
In an earlier presentation, the fellow said that as the number of blogs increases on a multi-site, you run into speed issues.
No, because you have. It's the same data. If you could create 1,000 networks, if no one is coming to those networks, it won't matter. They'll just sit there, right? The second you have traffic and you have concurrent users, you have hits, you'll have performance issues there either way, single site or multi-site. If you have more visitors and you have more concurrent users, as your audience grows, performance becomes more of a concern. It is a nominal concern because you have more code loading, right? Like you have all of the multi-site code running, plus the little plugin to run multiple networks. But in terms of just simply having sites sitting there, doesn't matter because they're just sitting there.
Hey, I'm the person who said, what I was trying to express earlier was just you have to consider that when you're running 1,000 sites, you very well may be dealing with 1,000 times as much
Correct.
traffic.
Right.
You know?
So if that is what you have, then you definitely do want to have the hardware to support.
That's the person that I misunderstood.
No, yeah, it's okay. And we talked ahead of time because I wanted to make sure that my talk wasn't really stomping his and his talk wasn't really going to stomp mine.
So you may get into this in a little bit, so if we need to postpone.
No, sure.
Let's talk about the actual user on these multiple sites and multiple networks. Can they log in on any WP login and then be brought to the dashboard across networks, or how do you assign permissions to users across networks?
Right. So that's a good question. So I'll reiterate because it's because on a multi-network installation, it's one user base in the middle, right? So we get what that means, where you have the same login and password across every single site. But when you log in, what happens to you, right? And that's a good question because in WordPress alone, without something like WP Multi-Network running to manage the little bit of that experience, it's actually really crappy. Like what happens is this redirect madness of like where do you belong as a user and how do you get there? And once you start integrating things like LDAP or whatever else, you really have to craft and own what the login and registration experience looks like because WordPress tries to handle this in a as good as it can, but it can be a little hairy. So there's one thing that I love showing off about this that is kind of the default experience. So let's say that you have a multi-site installation. So your default experience is you'll actually, let's just say you have an account on this installation, but you actually don't have any role or capability on any site at all. You have an account, you signed up, or someone created an account for you, but you actually don't have an admin account or access to any blog or any site on this installation, then WordPress will automatically redirect you to what's called the user dashboard. This is like this invisible hidden voodoo area of WordPress that no one knows about or uses because it's only available on multi-site and it's only for users that don't have roles on any site on the network. WordPress will automatically bump you to wp-admin/user and give you this ugly, barren wasteland of WordPress where there is nothing for you to do. So this is actually really cool, and this was brought in WordPress 3.0 to solve this problem. And it also, thanks to something like WordPress.com and Automatic, the user dashboard solves this unique problem. WordPress.com used to have, and they might still have, dashboard.wordpress.com, where if you had an account that had 0 blogs, you would go to like this separate partitioned blog that gave you this exact same experience. But because this is a common problem for most sites that aren't WordPress.com, right? If you're running multiple sites, chances are you may have registration open, but they don't actually have access to WP admin. A good case for something like this is something like BuddyPress or BBPress, where your users do not have any, you don't want them going into WP admin, right? Like if they get there, there's a problem because they have signed into your social network. They do not belong in your blog, right? They should not be posting content. And if they get back there, it's only because they have some sort of access to do so. They're an editor, they're a moderator, there's something has allowed them to go in there. So this is where they go. And I love the user dashboard, actually. Like, I think the user dashboard is the most untapped and coolest part of WordPress right now, because you have an entire dashboard dedicated to what it is that a user should care about and see. Not you, because you're the admin, right? Like, you are the admin of an installation, and it's your installation and your site. But the users of your installation have this instead, right? Like, give them something useful here. Give them an isolated experience of how to post, or where do posts go, or what posts across multiple sites are theirs, or that they care about. And we have a blank slate of a user dashboard to start tapping into, and it uses all of WordPress's APIs for meta boxes and adding stuff to the menus, has its own filters and hooks to target the user dashboard. That's the coolest place. Like, if you were thinking, like, what can I do to help WordPress or build something that no one is doing right now, that's it, baby. Like, that's the place that no one thinks about. Because the user is an afterthought in WordPress, right? Like, there was a time where WordPress didn't even have multiple users. It was an old B2 conversion from having one blog author all the time. So the fact that there are multiple users, I mean, this is new stuff, right? So check that out. That's the default experience. Now, if you do have a role on a blog, going back to the original question of like, what is your experience, then it's going to depend, right? It will depend on what role or capability that you have on what site. So this isn't really going to be super helpful, but let's say that you've got 2 networks, domain.com and somethingelse.com. And they're on the same installation, so you've got the same users in the middle. And you have an admin role on one of the sites over here, and instead you go to, or on somethingelse.com, and you have nothing over here on domain.com. I go to domain.com and log in, and it's going to say, you don't have any business being here. You're going to get the typical WordPress message, WP die, what are you doing? Are you trying to go someplace else, right? If you go over here and log into somethingelse.com, it'll go, oh yeah, you've got something, you've got a role, let's get you into WP admin and have you on your way. So I think you want to craft that experience a little bit, right? Like, you want to be able to give them some useful redirect, something more helpful than WP die. Tangent, WP die is like the stupidest function in WordPress. I hate WP die like so much, because it doesn't help you at all. It kills the whole thing. It's literally dead. The WordPress has stopped breathing. It's dead. We killed it. WP die, are you sure, right? Or cheating, huh? Like, oh, I'm not cheating. I always want to go to where I thought I was trying to go is not useful. But that's what you get, is you end up sort of with the default experience. And I think you do want to craft that.
If you have permissions and admins on both networks, would you then get a page?
Then you'll just get logged. You'll get redirected to WP admin wherever you're trying to go or access. It'll redirect you in as usual. And signups are a little funny too, right? Like, if you create an account, like you go to domain.com/wpregister.php, you can create an account and you're good, and then it'll give you whatever the default role is for that network, and you're fine. If you go to somethingelse.com and you WP/WP register and you create an account, you'll get whatever the default role is on that site that you registered on, right? Like, it doesn't really discriminate against the experience, but as a user, it's a little funny, because you don't really, one, as a user, if they're 2 separate domains, you probably don't even know that they're running the same code, right? Like, you would never really know that this site is connected to this site. This is very similar to the confusion that people have when they go to bbpress.org and go, oh, I can log in with my wordpress.org account? I had no idea. For some of us, it's a little obvious because we get the relationship. But for someone that's new that goes to WP login, they don't know that they can use their WordPress login there. So when they're two separate domains, it's almost intentionally different. But I think like multi-network works out really well when you do have an existing community of people that all have an account for a reason, but they want to be able to have their own sets of sites. They want their own network of sites. So that's where it's helpful. So a good, I think, example is like we did something for Case Western, where they have the same exact sort of school setup that I was talking about, where their comm school has a need for multiple sites. So we have com.arts or com. Case Western's domain whatever edu/ whatever their blogs are that they want. And because WordPress can sort of be tricked into not really caring, you can have subdomains or subdirectories. You can have the root site of a network be a subdirectory, and then it has second-level sites. Like you can sort of decide where the networks live, and you can craft what the experience is and mask a lot of the gnarliness of WordPress behind having multiple networks with whatever sort of subdomain and path that you want. So like, the funny thing is, I think like my installation on my local here might be a little broken because it's like my local dev environment. But when you create a new site, like so we just created this site, right? So for example, because I have a subdirectory installation, that the only option when I go to add a new site is a subdirectory, right? Like I can't put anything before the jjj.dev. I can only put it afterwards, right? I'm creating a new site. It's a subdirectory install. It's the only option I have. But once I go to the sites I've created and I edit this site, you get this brand new sort of funny WordPress UI that's got these weird tabs that you haven't seen anyplace else, where you can start poking around under the hood, where you can break things the way that you want to break them. So let's say that you want this subdirectory site to be something else, then you just put it in here. Path, there you go. And it won't care, right? They didn't yell at me. It didn't say, hey, you can't put a subdomain here. You can put a subdomain there. And if I had this set up in my host file on my local machine, WordPress would just run it. It wouldn't even care. WordPress tries to protect you from yourself, but once you go past that extra step, you can literally set up sites and networks and domains to be anything you want. You could set up this one site to be, it won't work, right? Because I don't have it set up this way, but okay, so we set it up to be wordpress.org. It won't care. It will just take what you give it. So you could make multiple sites, multiple networks, however you want to group these things together. And as long as the installation of WordPress knows that a request is coming in from somewhere that is looking for this particular domain and path, and as long as there's a site that does exist in that domain and path, WordPress will load that site from that domain and path, right? Like you can do whatever you want, which is why I think domain mapping, again, going back, not necessary. Because you can just do it here. You don't have to map a domain. You can just do this here. Now, for something like WordPress.com is a little bit different because the reason you guys have an automatic and WordPress.com needs domain mapping is something like SSL. When you go into WP admin, it takes you to the non-mapped domain. You get john.wordpress.com because all of it is under the same wildcard cert. So you get one cert that runs all of WordPress.com. Whereas if you domain map it, if you make multiple networks and they have new domains, then you need to have a new cert for each one of those domains. So the reason why it works well for something like WordPress.com is because they literally are saying, okay, leave WordPress alone. All of these sites can stay what they are, but when it's not a WP admin request, and whenever you go to john.wordpress.com, map it back to jjj.me instead. Right? So they're using domain mapping in like a real way where you want to map a domain from one place to the next. But inside of WordPress, when you're doing it and saying, okay, well, I want to map this domain from this place back to my same IP address that it's hosted on, which is I think what people use in multi-site, not necessary. Overhead that you don't need. So the way that, this is like a secret, I don't think it's a big secret, but WordPress.com uses multiple networks. It doesn't use it in the way that I wish they did. But it does use it in a way that I think is like really clever, which is Jetpack. Jetpack uses a second network on WordPress.com to sort of back up the things that you need so that you can, so Jetpack works properly, right? It's all of its settings and its synchronization get backed up to site ID 2 on WordPress.com. So you don't necessarily have to use it for multiple networks. You can use it just to give yourself a separate site ID to store whatever weird WordPress information it is that you want to store in there. So multiple networks, again, is like, it is the thing that you will want or be thinking about kind of 5 years from now, I think. The same way that people were thinking about multi-site 5 years ago. Like multi-site scratches one itch, where I want multiple sites. Okay. But multi-network, I think, is the next evolution of that, where you've got groups of sites. You end up with one multi-site installation that's got 50 sites. But maybe 4 of them are together, and another 4 of them are together, and the other ones are independent. How do you get them to talk to each other? Well, you make a new network and you move them over there. And that's what multiple networks is. And the best part, again, about it is it's built into WordPress core. This is like when you install a plugin like WP Multi-Network, it doesn't do anything to the database. It doesn't go in and start touching and breaking things in a way that's non-standard. It just gives you a UI for something that's already baked in to WordPress from the start. So that, question right away.
So since you're creating multiple networks instead of multiple sites, I just want to double check that. Like, so if you did this for a client site and if they were an admin, like they can't create their own like sub-sites of their own site, right? They still are only allowed to, the basic stuff only on their own site.
So that's a good question, and I will repeat the question for everyone that maybe didn't hear it. Is if you give a client access to a site, can they then go and start creating multiple sites on their network? And there are two-part answer. One, they can if you make them a super admin, right? Like WordPress's concept of the network admin is being a super admin. We call them capes, right? You have the cape, you're super, you fly around wherever you want. So if you make them a super admin, they can create sites, they can delete sites. It is their network to be an admin of. If you only make them a regular admin on the one site that you give them, then no, they cannot go in because they don't have a cape, right? So the way that I would set this up, like let's imagine a world where I am hosting sites for my clients, right? So the way that I would do this, because your clients are crafty, they're going to come up with real big ideas that you could be ready for, where if you're going to host a site for a client, you could create a new network for them knowing that maybe a year from now they might want multi-site, and then they only have one site on that network, and they're not a super admin. So their experience is they don't know any better. They don't know that they have multi-site. They don't know that you're hosting them on a multi-network installation. All that they know is they have a domain, they have a login and password, and when they log in, they have WordPress. It looks like they just have the same site experience that they would always have. A year later when they go, oh, I want another site, I want it at puppies.mygreatbusinessname.gov. That you can do that for them for no additional cost to you, right? So you can create a new network for every new client that you have, only give them one site, and then when they want multiple sites later, you can spool them up easy for free.
But if they're so if they are a super admin on their own site, they still are limited
To their own network, right? So they can network activate plugins, they can network activate themes and everything else, but they can't go in and start poking around at things that they can't poke at.
Just to confirm, so in effect, there is a global super admin.
So that's another good question. Right,
There's a
right.
super admin
So
for a multi-site, and then
So
there's
there-
an admin for
it's a good question, and there's not. WP, my plugin sort of twists some knobs to invent that concept in a way, but there isn't the global, right? That's what we want. That's why.
Yeah, 'cause
So that right.
I may want them to be able to create their own sites
Exactly.
but only within their network and not go look at anybody else.
Well, okay, so that's two different things.
Okay.
So you have multiple networks. They're a super admin on their network. They're not a super admin on your network. The networks do know the difference. But there are some things that WordPress core does not consider in this environment, which is one like deleting themes. You have a dashboard, right? In the themes admin, you can just delete the theme. It gives you file system access. Turn file system access off. It's just a constant that you can put into WP config, and that problem does go away, but you need to put that constant in there so that one super admin of one network doesn't delete the themes from the server that another network might be using, right? There is some crosstalk, particularly with the file system and deleting plugins and themes, that can be problematic. So turn off file system access, and then that fear is gone. And at that point, there is no sort of network access to all of it. You could, however, the way to do the global admin thing is the WP, like the super admins global. You can hack around and add yourself into it all the time. So you can just array push yourself onto the end of the super admins array, and now you are always your user login is always in there. So you can do that. But I think you had a question, and then you. So over here first.
My question is, I know it's multi-site. We can integrate multiple databases, especially as it grows, so it's not overloading the database.
Yep.
Are you also doing the same functions? And everything?
HyperDB works pretty much exactly identically the way that you would want to use it for single sites or multi-site.
It'd be real good for when they decide they want to go somewhere else with a single install too.
Yep, exactly.
Nice.
Yep.
Well, and this is related to what's already been asked, I guess, but so people within a particular network can be a super admin and they can make sites within that network.
Correct.
But then you're the guy who control all the networks. What are you? Are you also just a super admin, or are you something? How are you different from the limited super admin?
Right. So you're pretty much still a super admin that knows how to get into the file system and has the connection to the database directly if you want to, right?
The interface, there's the networks tab.
Right.
There may
So
be a better answer for his question. Is there like a user role editor for this?
no. So that's the other problem with this, because this is sort of an emerging sort of idea with networks, is networks don't actually have roles or capabilities the way that sites do, right? Like in sites, you're an admin or a subscriber or whatever you are. But on a network, you either are the super admin or you're not the super admin. There is no sort of network level role. And there could be. We could take the API and adapt it, right? Because we actually, thankfully, also have with every site, we have site meta, the same way you have the options table. So you do have, with the site ID column, meta, right, to assign. So if you wanted very easily to just say, and I think that's where the super admin's data, at least used to be stored, was in site meta. But you can see for that new site that I just spooled up, we've got site ID 3 in there. So to answer your question, no, there isn't sort of different levels of roles for network admin access, but there should be.
When you're in the WordPress, we were looking at the WordPress interface before.
Right.
You had that sites tab.
Right.
Can any super admin see, I'm sorry, the networks tab.
Right.
Can any super admin see that tab?
So see, this is fun. This is good. We're getting it. So the good thing about like this little networks tab here, right, is I actually only have this plugin activated on one site or on one network, right? So it's only accessible to super admins of the jjj.dev domain. So if I have another domain or I have another network of sites, this plugin isn't network activated on those sites, so they'll never see that UI. You activate the plugin on whatever group of sites you want to give them whatever UI that you need. So you do sort of get to incept the experience you want into whichever networks that you want to give them that experience on. It's a good question, though, because I think that comes up a lot.
Your plugin.
And Andy is waiting to troll me. I could see you. You want to talk. You want to talk. Bring it. No?
Ultimately, with super admins, you really just have to keep in mind that they can do anything.
Right.
In the sense of, think about this, right? They have the ability to arbitrarily put anything they want to a post. In which case, they
Yep.
can just as easily, if you have a malicious superadmin, like they can do anything. Whether, even if you're disabling file edits, there are other ways they can manage to do. So
Yep.
your best thought is that if you are going to be multi-network and you have superadmins, act like they can do anything.
Exactly.
They really can, right? They can reset your password. Think about it, right?
Yep.
So you can break down a lot of the stuff, but really, like having superadmins only on certain networks is a way to funnel them into what their areas of responsibility for. But it's tough to think of them as permissions because
Right.
you are ultimately trusting them with essentially the keys to the kingdom. You're just saying like, don't go in the garage. Like that's about all you're
Right.
saying.
And that's what I mean is like multiple networks is such an emerging sort of idea conceptually with WordPress that
So it looks like this would be the next plugin.
right, like the iteration of WP multi-network would be trying to solve some of those problems in a way that would really be like a core friendly direction to try and open up some solutions to the problems like Andy is talking about. Like the unfiltered HTML one is a big deal, right? I mean, you're giving them the ability to post whatever they want all over the place. So,
Networks handle that. I mean, again, there are filters in place to do all of this.
yeah,
You wanted to make it so superadmins can't change each other's passwords.
right,
If you wanted to prevent them from editing certain sites or from certain networks, you can do that. If you wanted to make it so superadmins were global across everything, you can also do that.
exactly.
It's possible. It's again, like you're handing them so much trust. And
Right.
At that point, it's just all you're trying to do really is just make it so it's maybe more streamlined for them,
Yep.
but not necessarily locking them down anymore because then it's just kind of unrealistic.
Yep.
And it's a lot of work for not a lot of gain either.
And that's where something like WordPress.com becomes so tricked out. Like you end up with lots of like plugins to craft the experience, and that's where like multi-network and like a UI for having multiple networks is super helpful for you as theoretically the one super admin that's actually running this entire installation, either for clients or for yourself, for your own sites that you have, that kind of thing. Once you go beyond that and want to start enabling your users to have access to a network level dashboard, you want to own that experience for them and craft it very, very specifically. I think you're next.
Can you talk about the effect on hosting? You know, as you scale the networks and sites, do you find yourself needing to scale your hosting faster, slower?
It's similar to his question, where it's if you're ramping up traffic for each site, let's assume that each site has equal traffic or each network has equal traffic, then for every new network that you add is that many more hits and that many more logins and that much more interaction. So yeah, to that effect, yes. But the sites themselves sitting there idling, doing nothing, if it's just a site that you make for a domain that gets no traffic, you make a ton of those and it's not going to matter because they're just sort of sitting there hanging out. So as traffic and as users ramp up, then yes. But the sites and the networks themselves sitting there, no.
So server resources aside, one single database, like how many, in theory, how many sites is it healthy or safe to run?
Assume zero traffic on them?
Right.
But assuming zero traffic.
Oh, that doesn't matter. What is it?
Tables can database hold in MySQL.
Yeah. You can
I mean, I've heard what the rule of thumb is at WordPress.com on how they try to balance it. It's about, so each site is about 10 tables, actually it's 9. They normally, I believe, put about 1,000 sites in a database, about 1,000 databases on the server. Something that is maybe 4 or 5 years old, but just to give you a general idea of the scale, I'm sure it's changed right now. I mean, since then, all of their database servers are now SSDs, so it's often faster to run a query than to go to Netcache. Give you an idea about the performance there. So in that case, things obviously change. I imagine those numbers are off by even like a magnitude or more. But just to give you a general idea, if you're running a few hundred sites, you should be able to do it all in one shot. You just might again, this is talking about a single master database. If you have, a number of slaves also working, like you're going to have a cluster,
Right.
Not just one server, but maybe like 5, for example, whatever it might be. But just random rule of thumb on that.
I agree.
4 billion tables is the NODB limit.
4 billion.
4
Only.
billion with a
4
B.
billion. Okay.
Yeah, with a B.
That's a lot of tables. So no more than 500,000 sites.
So Buddy Press should work just fine. Any other questions at all? Go ahead, sure.
What are the compromises with themes, editing themes, best practices for creating child themes, and compromises with plugins?
Well, that's a good question. So, it depends on what you're trying to build, and I don't know that multi-network changes the answer to this. Like if you had multiple sites and say you had lots of themes or maybe one master theme and some other sites that were running permutations of that theme, there are a lot of different approaches on how you partition which sites are running which version of them. Like even, for example, like on BuddyPress and bbpress.org, both of those sites, they're basically mirror images of each other. BuddyPress is red and bbpress is green, but they both have support forums. They both run the same plugins, except bbpress doesn't have BuddyPress running on it, but it will. We have a base theme that both of the child themes pull from. They are sort of separate networks in sort of a funny way, where they both have their own sites. And we have a base theme. I don't want to call it a parent theme because the codex runs off of that same theme also, but has a little bit of extra custom code that it loads because it needs to have a different sidebar and different things. So you do, I think, and you end up inventing sort of an experience to handle the complexities of having multiple different purpose-built sites across different networks. But I don't know that multiple networks changes that answer because you would have whatever root theme is running on the root of your site that is typical WordPress sort of news site. Maybe you've got a slider and you've got a sidebar and you have all of your posts and whatever. And maybe you have a subdomain off of that that's like a knowledge base. You want the same header and the same footer, but you want the guts of it, the content, to be different. Your parent-child theme relationship there is the same as what it would be with multiple networks. And then the only thing that plugins would give you is you do have now network-activated plugins where you can decide which one or several plugins is running amongst which group of sites. You can still activate plugins on single sites if you want to customize one specific site. And then you still have MU plugins, you have must-use plugins that actually do still run across the entire installation. They are global plugins that run across every site and every network across the whole thing. So you still have all of those things at your disposal. You just have it across multiple sort of networks of sites as you decide to group them together.
And you have made a BuddyPress with it.
Yeah, so there's a plugin on top of WP multi-network called BP multi-network that lets you have multiple BuddyPress networks amongst one installation. So let's say you want to run several communities, each with their own profile fields and groups and activity streams and everything else. You can still run multiple off of the same one. So if you wanted to have, one installation running a social network for puppies and another running a social network for kittens, you can do it off the same one installation, just having separate networks and separate installations of both, or separate networks of both of them with the same installation.
Could you then have a puppies and a kitten fan be the same person, same login?
Exactly.
What would they see when they log in as a user of that site?
It depends on which site or which network that they're logging into, right? If they're logging into the puppies network, they're going to go where they've logged into, wherever they have a role. You go to the other one, they would go over there. Go ahead. Poke holes in it.
No, I like
No? Okay.
Your bbpress versus buddypress.org thing reminded me of the fact that there are so many different ways you can dice this.
Right.
So for example, while these run plugins directory, you could, in WP config, change the WP plugin to your constant based on the network.
Exactly.
Right? Like you could have all the networks share the same plugins directory, but then have each network has its own themes, directory of themes.
Yep.
bbpress.org actually isn't multi-site.
It's not.
At the moment.
It will
It's
be.
a single site installation that shares user tables with the multi-site installation, which is buddypress.org.
Yep.
And they share the same code base.
And they share the same for the most part, like IP. I mean, they share everything.
They share
So,
the same code base, they run
right.
the same servers, but they just happen to, again, we're just layering different things on top.
Yep.
That's all it is.
So when you go to bbpress.org, WP config looks at the global and says, "Are you requesting bbpress.org? If you are, let's tweak some things a little bit. Let's pull in some other code. Let's tweak sort of the experience that you're going to get." But what he's saying is exactly the thing that we did for something like Case Western, where certain super admins that are trusted users are going to actually get a different set of themes available to them, we'll just rewrite it. They'll get maybe a few that are the same, but they did have a need to have them be different. So you can very early on in WordPress's bootstrapping process make a different decision and rewrite the entire WP content directory or the themes directory or all of it so that they have different media, different uploads, different everything. You can sort of craft that experience very, very intricately. So that's exactly how we do bbpress.org. And it won't always be that way. We've sort of been working towards pulling a lot of that stuff into the buddypress.org installation, just to then eventually partition the networks back off of it. But it's also only because I want for a user's activity on bbpress.org to get pulled into their activity stream still, right? So we have some other cross-talking things that we want to do on wordpress.org that we sort of do some customizations for. We got a question in the back right away, too. When am I done? How am I on time? I'm okay.
You're cutting to the break a little bit.
Oh, well, if you guys want to break, you can go break. If you don't, we'll just keep running it. But yeah, go ahead. You had a question. I'll let you go. No? The stripes and the shirt? No? You? Yeah. No. Okay. Anybody else? Anything else? Okay. Thank you for hanging out.